Welcome everyone to our next meetup that we have at Transform, Thrive, Unleash. And we are really, really lucky tonight to have the beautiful Caroline Clarke here with us as a guest speaker. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Nikki. Nice to be here. Thank you.
No, thank you. I know you're a busy woman, so we really appreciate you being here. So Caroline is we're not doing a presentation tonight. We're actually just going to have a chat. Caroline's going to share her story. I find I've been in a narcissistic relationship before, and this is part of what Caroline's going to be talking about, and lots of different types of narcissistic relationships that you can be in, and it's something that you don't realize that you're in until you're in it, and you start to have some alarm bells going off, and then you start to research a bit more or understand a bit more what's going on. And so I find that it's a really fascinating topic to talk about. And so I'm really, really looking forward to tonight. So I'm going to hand over to Caroline, who I'm just going to let you talk and let us know who you are and what you do and tell us your amazing story. And what we're going to do is hold any questions towards the end, and exactly like we have done with our previous ones, the whole thing about this is not just to learn. Yes, you can learn some new things, you can get some inspiration from people's stories, but it's open to discussion as well. So if that's what we want to do at the end, we can do that as well. So I'm going to mute and be quiet, and I'm going to throw it over to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Nikki. Thanks very much. And yes, I love the fact that you said it is intertwined, because narcissism is everywhere. And if I have to be brutally honest, we've all got a little bit of it in ourselves. Just like, I guess you look at, Asperger's and any of those sort of, issues. And I think we've all got a little part of it in ourselves. But the reason I'm here tonight to talk more deeply about it is because we live a life of patterns until we break them. So firstly, I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Caroline. I'm a mum of 4 boys. Yes, yikes, I hear you whisper, 4 boys between the ages of 7 and 16. I grew up in a family of girls, so goodness knows how I ended up with 4 boys. I longed for a brother, so maybe I just wished too hard and I got four boys. So I'm here tonight to share my story of being trapped in an emotionally abusive relationship. What I will say is being trapped for a very long time, completely unaware as to the depths of where I was. I had no idea. I just knew that something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I think this is the general consensus of people in narcissistic relationships, particularly covert, is your intuition screams that there's something wrong, but you just can't. There's no proof, that you just don't know exactly what it is. So you just tend to sort of mull along and distract yourself. So I was in this relationship for 20 years, but I would say that it was about 10 years in that things started to red flags started to appear, and I just started to question this person who subtly changed. It wasn't huge changes. And then 17 months ago, I'll go back to the story later, but 17 months ago, I took the brave decision to leave. It was a very courageous decision, given that at the time I wasn't working. I had 4 dependent children, no savings. So I was very codependent on this partner, which is why we stayed together for so long. But I just decided, it was like this mini awakening that I had. And it's almost like I woke up from a coma one day and said, I have to get out, but I also have to trust, put my true faith in the universe to hold my back and know that if I can just escape this relationship, then the rest will just work out for itself. It's almost like I was putting trust in, I guess, my higher self, in the universe, in whoever was going to hold me. But I just declared, if I step my foot out of this relationship, please support me, whoever that may be. And every day from then on, which has been 17 months now, I still have that self-belief that I will be okay, even though there's been days when I've gone holy moly, my bank account, is bleeding dry, but just kept going, it's okay, you left and you will be okay. There's a bigger reason out there. Just keep going, just keep going. And also what I realized in the relationship is, which was probably just as important as my health and well-being, was the 4 boys. What was I teaching them about self-respect, self-love, loving relationships? It was an empty relationship. And I thought to myself, that's what my mum modeled to me, and I'm doing exactly the same to my own children. If I don't get out of this and redeem my own self-love and self-respect, then I'm teaching them exactly the same. You don't respect yourself, you just enter these toxic relationships and you just get walked all over. So the decision was for me firstly, but also hugely for my children, to break that cycle. So I just want you to ponder these 3 questions. Have you ever felt too ashamed to speak openly about any dysfunction, whether it be a friendship, a career, a family member, your children, your boss, whoever it may be? Have you felt that you've been too ashamed to speak up about this relationship that doesn't feel right, or you may feel disrespected? Because it doesn't just happen in marriages, it happens everywhere. It's huge in the corporate world. You think about narcissism. In order to be a leader, you have to have some narcissistic traits to go out there, and you think about Donald Trump and a lot of these presidents and the government, they have to have some of these narcissistic skills to go, what, this is all about me, and I'm going to just I'm going to push through with this decision. I don't care about anybody else. So it is across the board, it is everywhere. And I think it's so important to recognize the signs, because once you're dealing with a narcissist, you can actually play them at their game. You really can. And it's about understanding how they operate and knowing that it's actually nothing to do with you, essentially. I'll get further into that personality later. But so that's the first question, is just asking yourself, were you too ashamed to open up? The reason I didn't leave for many years is because I was too scared to speak up. The fear of failure, the fear of this perfectionism, this family. Friends of mine in Sydney used to call my kids the country road kids. They used to have this beautiful blonde hair and, would show up and it like the picture perfect family on the surface, but clearly it was completely opposite, underneath that. And we share on Facebook and, we take 50 photographs, like, come on, children, smile. You put this one photograph on and everything to this perfect family. And, if I have to be truly honest, I probably, falsely in some way projected this image, because I think maybe deep down I thought, if I project an image of my family as being this country road family, it will disguise what's really going on, because I'm not ready to face it yet. So I felt like I had this imposter syndrome and I was living a bit of a lie. So ponder that question. And the second question I want to ask you, have you ever felt stuck inside a relationship and you didn't know how to leave? Now, this can happen a lot in friendships and also in like your outlaw relationships. Mother-in-law, father-in-law, and just feeling like you had to move away from your true self in order to fit in order to feel like you belong and you're accepted. And the third one is, have you ever felt like financial fear? If I leave this relationship, this career, or this agreement, I'll be broke at the end of it. So I must just stay and tolerate this relationship, because the consequences of leaving are far greater than staying. And that I would say would speak for most women. Because if you imagine we put our career on the side, we raise the children, and we are super dependent on our partners, which in some sense it empowers them to have control. And we stay for the children, but we also stay through fear of being able to support ourselves, which is huge. And that was definitely one of the reasons that I stayed. But what I've also realized is, look at your fears about leaving relationships, and also look at your fears about confronting them too, because often your fears are connected to a story. So we tend to catastrophize. If I was to speak up, then I would probably be rejected, I would be abandoned, I would be judged. But that's often attached to a story from our past that we're just playing out over and over and over. And research shows that 80%, and this is a stat from the States, but I thought it was really interesting, that 80% of people, particularly women, have encountered an emotionally abusive relationship. That is absolutely huge. You know, you think about, you know, your children. I've got a lot of clients who they're actually in abusive relationships with their teenagers, but we just tolerate it because we think, you know, we have to, like, we're trying to get our children through these teenage years, but no one should have to tolerate emotionally abusive relationships. So my story began, if I would love to explain to you the patterns, because if we can be aware of patterns and how they started and the intergenerational trauma and ancestral conditioning, once you're aware that you're with a narcissist, the first thing I did was to go, okay, if I look back to my childhood and beyond, let me see where the draw card to a narcissist started. And I started to think about, okay, so my mum was in a relationship with my dad who was abusive, both he was physically and emotionally, and also quite coercive, controlling financially. So that's my first red flag. And then I started to connect the dots and go, okay, well, my mum's mum had a similar relationship. So I'm going, okay, there's something in my maternal line that I am continuing. And if you imagine, if you grow up in a family that has got that toxic dysfunction, the child learns to anchor in that this is actually a safe place for me in this environment. So safe in the chaos, safe in the unsafety. I'm actually unsafe, but this is my safe place because this is what I'm used to and this is what I'm familiar with. So the reason I was drawn to the narcissist, because it was actually energetically mimicking my father. And that was the biggest realization for me, was to, I guess, face the fact that I've married my father, but he shows up very different to my father. So how did I miss it? And I missed it because the emotions that he brought up in me were the same emotions as my childhood. The feeling of not being good enough, the feeling of rejection, the feeling of not having a voice. I lived my marriage with him in my little girl state, which is absolutely huge if we can really go and look back at family patterns, because that's the seed where it all began. So my mum checked out at age 60 out of her toxic relationship, and she went into early dementia, which is truly and utterly devastating. However, through my healing, I've realized that it was actually a conscious choice, because mom admitted she was too scared to leave dad because the consequences were far, far worse than her staying, that she thought, what's my other way out? And my other way out is just to sink back into depression. And then it just, like, there was this rolling ball into forgetfulness, and then the dementia took hold. And there is a correlation between Alzheimer's and emotional abuse. I've looked at the research and I've looked at the stats. And when I've spoken to people who are in toxic relationships, many would say, oh my goodness, my mother went into early dementia, or my father got Alzheimer's and he was bullied. And so, you know, it's huge. The detriment on our health is absolutely huge. Love's complicated. It is really complicated, and it's addictive. So we stay because we want to feel like we belong. We want to feel like we've got a connection with someone, and we can't thrive or survive as a human being without a sense of belonging, love, and connection. So we stay in that relationship because on the outside of that, it's unknown, it's uncertain. So if I stay here and tolerate it, but at least I belong, at least I've got some sense of connection and some sense of false love, but it's better than going out there on my own and not knowing. So the physical and mental ailments that I got in my relationship, which was another huge wake-up call, was my body was screaming to me, wake up to the situation, but I chose to ignore it. I chose to self-sabotage, and I chose to drink alcohol. I chose to distract. I chose everything outside of me rather than going in, because I wasn't ready to look inside. In fact, I wasn't even ready to wake up to the situation. So my body started to wake me up. So what happens is, if we're suffering emotionally and we ignore the signs, the body will give us the signs. It will scream at you. It will give you an illness. It will give you an ache or a pain. It will respond to you in some way after the emotional breakdown. So my body started to do this. It started to have chronic lower back pain. And when you look at the emotional and physical connection, back pain is often a sign of lack of support. Well, in a toxic relationship, that person is very self-centered. They've got no time for you. Another thing that was happening was I started to get this itchy skin. Like, it was almost like these hives. At nighttime, I would itch so much that I wake up in the morning, I'd have scabs all over my arms, and knowing something was terribly wrong. And then I realized one day that that's what Mum used to do. I used to say to her as a teenager, Mom, you've got all these scabs on your arms. And she said, oh, love. She said, I itch in the night. I just don't stop itching. And I just thought, wowzers, that is huge. That's an alarm bell. So, okay. So I am becoming my mother. I'm becoming my mother. I've got, and I had this feeling like it was like chronic fatigue. And when you look at toxic relationships and the effect it has on the central nervous system, you are constantly in fight or flight. Constantly. Now, fight or flight is there to keep you safe. It's a trauma response that if you're being chased by a big brown bear, the response would be to fight or flight. That's what innately is in us to keep us alive. If you're in fight or flight constantly in your relationship, that it plays hugely on your central nervous system, on your adrenal glands, and it leads into depletion, emotional depletion, lack of energy. And this is what I started. It was like I was on the verge constantly of getting sick, but the sickness never came. It was just this breakdown, emotional breakdown that I was choosing to ignore. So it's really important to listen to your body and tune in. And I think I ignored it for such a long time. And by ignoring my inner needs, I was actually doing the same to myself that he was doing. So he would silence me, and I was actually silencing myself. I was ignoring that little voice that kept saying, you need to get out of there. This is not right. You deserve better. And I'd just ignore it. And what happens is we are a reflection to the outside world. So if I'm ignoring myself and I'm squishing my intuition and I'm betraying, then I'm going to attract someone who's going to actually treat me the same. And that's exactly what he did. He wasn't trustworthy. He ignored me because I was actually treating myself exactly the same way. So I'm an invitation to the world to come on in, everybody. You know, I don't trust myself. I ignore myself. I don't love myself. Come and treat me exactly the same. And that's how narcissists magnetize to you, because then we go outside ourselves and we're people pleasers, self-sacrificers, want to fix everyone. So narcissists love that. They love you to stroke their ego. So while ever you're trying to look outside yourself and fix the narcissist or the person in the toxic relationship, you're actually separating further from yourself. So the wake-up call for me was in December 2020. This was the final straw, and you know, to say the story, it doesn't seem huge, but when you get to the final breaking point, it doesn't need to be an affair. It can be the smallest tiny thread that just breaks and you say that is enough. Statistics show that women, it takes them 4 years to leave a relationship. 4 years. So you're contemplating that for a very long time. So the day that you declare, I'm done, you are well and truly done. There's no going back, because you have literally revisited that spot many times over. Now, statistically, men, it takes them 4 years post-separation to accept that it's over. So there's like this 8-year gap. So by the time the woman says, I'm done, the man goes, how can that be? You say, well, I've been telling you for 4 years, and they suddenly go, really? Didn't think you were serious. And then it takes them 4 years to get over it. And that's why they tend to generally go and look for a replacement very quickly, because they just want that mother figure or someone just to, you know, look after them. So this day in 2020, the kids had broken up from school and everyone got hit with a gastro bug. And it was a Tuesday morning, and I said to him, we've just had like days of the kids being sick, and I feel like I'm getting sick today. I can feel it coming on. I'm really, he goes, I'm going to Brisbane for 2 days with work. And I said, but I actually feel like I'm getting sick, and I've seen how the kids are. And he went, I'm going. And he left. For 48 hours I was on my hands and knees, crawling around the house, trying to mother the children who were then better by that stage, while I was vomiting. He didn't check in on me for 12 hours, and he still didn't come home for 2 days while I'm on my hands and knees. That was my breaking point. That was my rock bottom that said, what if this was a hospitalization? What if this was cancer? What if this was an operation? If he can't show up for you for a gastro bug, then how will he show up when it's something really serious? So that was my awakening that said, you deserve better than this. And lo and behold, it turned up from his trip to Brisbane. 2 days later, he got floored with the same bug, and he was lying on the couch going, and just like, you know, man flu. I need some sympathy. And I was like, you left me for 2 days. I ain't giving you anything, mate. I'm done. So that was the day I decided to leave. I decided I was absolutely done. I think it was just, I needed the, you know, event after event to go, this is me done. You know, there was many other facets to the story. I just recently went on SBS on Insight program. If you get a chance to watch it, it's on demand. And I went on there, got invited on to talk about mother-in-laws because his mum's a narcissist. And that's where it all began. She treated me very badly, and he stood by and watched. So I realized that this person will never ever support me. So I actually need to go and support myself. I actually need to go and mother myself and nurture myself and give back all of what I've lost in the relationship and beyond back to childhood. So hence to say, 17 months later, I'm raising the children by myself 100%. I'm still in the family home, and my business is building. I set up my coaching business not long after, because I realized if I can be the voice for other women to say, if I can leave a relationship with no job, no savings, and you know, no family, all my family in the UK, nobody here, literally by myself, if I can do it, then anyone else can. Anyone, whether it be, you know, your boss or your friend or your sister, brother, whoever, you can do it. Because the moment you declare to the world, I deserve better, the world will start giving you better. It's that one declaration that I needed to make that said, I am no longer going to tolerate this anymore. So you are what you believe. And this is quite a hard pill to swallow. But in that relationship, I didn't believe that I was worthy of anything better. He was very old-fashioned in that, you know, I give you a roof over your head, you know, what more do you want? Which is, that was very that generation. He's very sort of old school with that. Like, what more do you want? Well, I want a connection. I want to feel loved. I want to feel accepted. But I needed to do that for myself first. So there began my journey into self-acceptance, self-worth, the feeling of being good enough, the feeling like I matter, because I knew, and here's the key, I knew that if I didn't heal those parts within me, the next person to come through the door would be another narcissist, because it's just a repetitive family pattern. If I didn't learn the lesson from that relationship, which is standing up and taking responsibility for the part that I played. And here's the hard pill to swallow. I did play a part. I enabled it. I enabled it for at least 10 years. So without an enabler, a narcissist, it can't perform. It needs someone to actually stroke his ego and try and fix and try and make it all better. So the work began after the relationship ended. That was actually easier, leaving him, than delving into the mother wound and the father wound, the sister wound, because it's mum, dad, sister, grandma, and all of those people who raised me that criticized me, beat me down, you know, were jealous. My sister was incredibly jealous, that squished me so far down that I needed to go out into the world as a people pleaser. That's the only way that I could get validation. So the minute I stepped into the relationship with him, I was people pleasing him too. So when you've grown up in a toxic relationship, they're normal. They're normal. You attract that person into your life to play out the same behaviors that someone from your past would have done. So when you get into the, I'm now going to be responsible for me and make a change, that's when you start to attract people who vibrate on a higher frequency. To step out of that lack and the fear. When you're in a toxic relationship, you're fear driven, you're in lack, you're in scarcity, you're in dread, very low frequency vibration. But if you stand up and say, I take responsibility out of victimhood, because I could sit all day and say it's his fault, and I did sit there for a while, it didn't serve me very long, but it's not all his fault. Okay, it's time for me to go, I want a loving relationship, but unless I heal the wounds that took me there, I'll attract someone exactly the same. So in order to get where I got today, it was looking into the blocks and the beliefs from childhood. And once you clear the blocks and beliefs, then you manifest money, success arrives. People walk out of your life and make space for people who are more positive and encouraging and inspirational. So not only in that 17 months, I've lost a lot of friendships. And the thing with toxic relationships is they have their flying monkeys. They have the people who want to damn you and put you down and blame you, which I just had to sit back and say, what will be, will be. I know my truth and I'm going to work on myself. So lots of relationships filtered out as well, but it made space for all the new to come in. So as a result of that, my mission now and I'm writing a book. I'm writing a book on not just toxic relationships, but it is that taking responsibility. And when I explain my story, I actually write from the soul. So this is what the soul feels like in a abusive relationship. These are the feelings, these are the emotions, because when people read my blog, they go, oh my goodness, that's me, and I had no idea. Because when you're in such a depressed state, you are so foggy, confused, you lose your creativity, you can't think straight, and you can't even speak. I remember days I couldn't even speak. So through my survival story, if I can give a voice to other people to say, this is what it feels like, this is what it looks like, but this is your way out. There is a way out. So what I do is I coach women and men, because, you know, we're not just saying that it's all males out there that are narcissistic, because it's not true. There are women too. And also families, because children need to be given a lifeline from us. And it's our choice to stand up and make a change. And if we don't, those same beliefs and programs will be passed on to the younger generation. So we need to empower women and men in this generation to make a change for the young ones, because unless we do it, the same ancestral pattern just continues. I've seen it with my clients. It is incredible. It's just, and then the ripple effect when you heal, the ripple effect is just as intense and potent on everyone else around. So I can put it in the chat. I have a beautiful group called the Enlightened Empath that I set up. And I set up as a result of, it must be 600 people writing to me after I started posting my stories saying, we really want you to write a book. We want to hear more. So I just thought I need to step out of fear and into vulnerability and really wear my scars with pride. And that was a huge step to tell my story, because there's a lot at stake. my story then is out for my children to see when they're older. But I just felt if I stay silent, then I'm doing the world a disservice, and I'm doing every person in these relationships a disservice, because the truth be told, if I would have read my story as articulately written as it is 10 years ago, I would have had an out 10 years ago. I would never have stayed, because the stuff that I was reading, it was very factual. There was no real deep emotion, so I didn't really connect with it. So if I can tell my story through my book and motivational speaking, wherever the journey takes me, we just need to put a dent in toxic relationships by raising awareness to the people who are in those relationships.
That's an amazing story, and and a story of real strength. And there are so many that are still stuck in these relationships. One thing you said at the beginning to me was that the relationships are not necessarily marriages or partnerships, but it can be, careers, it can be friendships. Just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting, because I ended up in a job with Anglicare doing, because my background is I was a police officer. So I've seen a lot of domestic violence. I've worked in youth justice. So I ended up in 2020 working for Anglicare, and my boss, female, terrified me. She was very narcissistic. She was very controlling and quite aggressive how she spoke. She would literally frighten the life out of me. And since I've done this work, I realize again, it was another representation of my father. That's no coincidence that I ended up in that job. I was drawn there to learn the lesson, to stand up and have boundaries around narcissistic people. And this is what will happen unless we heal all of those wounds from childhood. You will step into careers, friendships, relationships, because you are a magnet, because you're literally radiating that, those childhood fears. So yeah, I had a boss, and she wasn't very nice, and she was another lesson. And I look back in my police career, there were so many narcissists around. I didn't have no idea. But here's the thing, once you start to connect to your intuition, and this is the gold, when you connect to intuition, which is that whisper, if you quieten down for long enough, there'll be a voice within, and it'll whisper. It might just say no, say no. And you're going, yes, I'll do that. And the voice is going, no, that's not right. If you quieten down enough to connect to your inner knowing and your intuition, that feels the energy of a narcissist. You might start to feel, a feeling in your stomach, or your heart might just start to beat, or you might feel you're just trying to, chat away to disguise how you feel. And your intuition knows. It really does. And especially when you've recovered from a narcissist, I feel your energy is much more sensitive to those people around you. So I and families, my sister's a narcissist. I've only found out like 4 years ago, and I look back to my childhood, and there were so many signs. She was so mean to me, and but again, you just think that that's a sibling relationship. You've got no idea. Not until you get into adulthood, and then you go back and sort of put the jigsaw piece together.
Yeah, and what are some of the signs that people can look out for that they might be in a narcissistic relationship?
Yeah, well, for me, it was more covert, so lots of manipulation. But if I had to be truthful, I didn't really know what manipulation meant, but it felt funny. It felt icky. So again, connect to that intuition, blaming. They will never, ever take responsibility. So the narcissist is either the hero or the victim, never the villain. Never the villain. So you will always be the villain. They're very clever at turning a situation around to blame you, always. So remember that they'll come in as a hero, they'll come in as a victim, mostly the victim, and you'll always be the villain. So if you feel like you're constantly being projected upon and blamed, it's always your fault, if it wasn't for you doing this wouldn't have happened, all that kind of thing. And obviously there's the verbal abuse itself, but for me, the awareness I want to really raise is the covert, because it is so silent. And moving on from the word silent treatment, huge stonewalling, walking away, ignoring you, which is what my mum used to do. So he was just another repetition of my mum. She would ignore me for 2 days if she was in a bad mood, so he would do the same. False promises, future fantasy, promising you a life, you know, it's going to be this kind of life, and just sucking you in, love bombing you, and then suddenly there's a change. And what happens if they're so clever is that in the early years, the love bombing is so intense that that's the memory that is ingrained in your mind. So when you want to leave, you keep going back to those early years of how it used to be. And that's what holds you there. But that is actually false. That wasn't truth. That was an illusion, because a person doesn't give you all of that and suddenly just change if they're just a normal person. So lots of silencing, stonewalling, gaslighting.
Yeah, it is really hard, and the recovery can be long, you know, to because there's a lot of for me, and I've dealt with a lot of women who've been in the same position, not only personally but through my coaching as well. There's a real sense of, how did I let this happen to me? I'm a strong woman. I'm this, I'm that. You know, how did this happen? And I had no idea.
Well, what happens there is narcissists are attracted to strong women. They're attracted to the traits that they attract to in you are the traits that they don't have. Okay, so they'll go for strong women. They'll go for women who are quite career minded. So every trait that they see in you that they're attracted to, they want that for themselves. And that's when they start to chip away. So women will say, gosh, I was so outgoing when I met them. I was so confident, and now I'm a shell of myself. So they're drawn to that confident person, but then they don't want you to have it anymore, because they don't want you to be confident. They want to squish you down, that you actually lose sense of who you are. It's so clever. It's like this tactic, and, and I think the fear of failure, and also the shame around, how did I let this happen to me? And that's why most women won't speak up. Most women will say, I don't want to talk about it because there's so much shame around, I allowed that to happen. Well, what you're doing is you're allowing a childhood pattern to continue. It's not that you allowed it to happen in the relationship. Your little inner child, that 0 to 7-year-old unconscious self, is just reliving her childhood.
Yeah. So tell us about your group.
Yeah, I'm just going to put in the chat. So yeah, I started that up in February. Called the Enlightened Empath. I think I got about 1,250 members or something. So and what I do in there is I share all of my, it's really raw, letters to my mum. I just and which is all going to form part of my book. So I just put little inspirational posts on there, but very much related to my journey. So everything in there is giving people an insight of how far I've come, where I was, just to motivate and inspire others to go, okay, this is where Caroline's got. Perhaps I could probably do the same. I might not be, on the same trajectory as her, but she's given me hope. She's given me a reason to get out of bed each day, because there could be light at the end of the tunnel. So I've got lots of, mostly women in there, people in various stages, lots have left and they still haven't found who they are again. And that, as I say, is the hardest part, is the leaving. And it's very sad when people say, I won't trust anyone again. Well, there are a lot of amazing men and women in the world. And if you choose not to trust again, then you're giving your power away to the narcissist, who's keeping you trapped again for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely.